Evan. I'm going to read to you from Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould. We're currently in the chapter called Walcott's Vision and the Nature of History. I think that's chapter 4. I think we're about to be in chapter 5. Let me just look. Just a few more pages, chapter 5. Okay, the theme of contingency, so poorly understood and explored by science, has long been a mainstay of literature. We note here a situation that might help to breach the false boundaries between art and nature, and even allow literature to enlighten science. Contingency is Tolstoy's cardinal theme in all his great novels. Contingency is the source of tension and intrigue in many fine works of suspense, most notably a recent masterpiece by Ruth Rendell, writing as Barbara Vine. A Fatal Inversion, 1987. A chilling book describing a tragedy that engulfs the lives and futures of a small community through an escalating series of tiny events, each peculiar and improbable, but perfectly plausible in itself, and each entraining a suite of even stranger consequences. A Fatal Inversion is so artfully and intricately plotted by this device that I must view Rendell's finest work as a conscious text on the nature of history. Sounds like a book we should check out. Two popular novels. Let me just make sure I'm not missing. Nope. Two popular novels of the past 5 years have selected Darwinian theory as their major theme. I am especially intrigued and pleased that both accept and explore contingency as the theory's major consequence for our lives. In this correct decision, Stephen King and Kurt Vonnegut surpass many scientists in their understanding of evolution's deeper meanings. King's The Tommyknockers, 1987, fractures a tradition in science fiction by treating extraterrestrial higher intelligences not as superior in general, wiser, or more powerful, but merely as quirky hangers-on in the great Darwinian game of adaptation by differential reproduction success in certain environments. King refers to this persistence as, quote, dumb evolution, end quote. I just call it Darwinism. And there's an asterisk to this. Our agreement on the theme, if not the terminology, provides hope that even the most implacable differences in style and morality may find a common meeting ground on this most important of intellectual turfs. For Steve is the most fanatical Red Sox booster in New England, while my heart remains with the Yankees. Those are baseball conflicts, in case you didn't pick up on that. Back to the text. Such equivocal success by endless and immediate adjustment breeds contingency, which then becomes the controlling theme of the Tommyknockers. As the aliens fail in their plans for Earth, thanks largely to evasive action by one usually ineffective, cynical, and dipsomaniacal English professor, King muses on the nature of controlling events in contingent sequences, and on their level of perceived importance at various scales. Quote, I would not be the one to tell you that there are no planets anywhere in the universe that are not large dead cinders floating in space because of war over who was or who was not hogging too many dryers at the local laundromat escalated into Doomsville. No one ever really knows where things will end, or if they will. Of course, we may blow up our world someday with no outside help at all, for reasons which look every bit as trivial from a standpoint of light years from where we rotate far out on one spoke of the Milky Way in the Lesser Magellanic Cloud. Whether or not the Russians invade the Iranian oil fields, or whether NATO decides to install American-made cruise missiles in West Germany may seem every bit as important as whose turn it is to pick up the tab for 5 coffees and a like number of Danish. End quote. Kurt Vonnegut's Galapagos, 1985, and that's a really great book, is an even more conscious and direct commentary on the meaning of evolution from a writer's standpoint. I feel especially gratified that a cruise to the Galapagos, a major source of Vonnegut's decision to write the book, should have suggested contingency as the cardinal theme taught by Darwin's geographic shrine. In Vonnegut's novel, the pathways of history may be broadly constrained by such general principles as natural selection. But contingency has so much maneuvering room within these boundaries that any particular outcome owes more to a quirky series of antecedent events than to channels set by nature's laws. Galapagos, in fact, is a novel about the nature of history in Darwin's world. I would, and do, assign it to students in science courses as a guide to understanding the meaning of contingency. In Galapagos, the holocaust of depopulation arrives by the relatively mild route of a bacterium that destroys human egg cells. This scourge first gains a toehold by striking women at the annual International Book Fair in Frankfurt, but quickly spreads throughout the world, sterilizing all but an isolated remnant of Homo sapiens. Human survival becomes concentrated in a tiny and motley group carried by a boat beyond the reach of the bacteria to the isolated Galapagos, and the last of the Conca Bono Indians, plus a tourist and adventurer or two. Their survival and curious propagation proceeds through a wacky series of contingencies. Yet all future human history now resides with this tiny remnant. Quote, in a matter of less than a century, the blood of every human being on Earth would be predominantly Conca Bono, with a little von Kleist and Hiraguchi thrown in. And this astonishing turn of events would be made to happen in large part by one of the only 2 absolute nobodies on the original passenger list for nature cruise of the century. That was Mary Hepburn. The other nobody was her husband, who himself played a crucial role in shaping human destiny by booking, when facing his own extinction, that one cheap little cabin below the waterline. End quote. Yes, we should read Galapagos. Contingency has also been an important theme in films, both recent and classic. In Back to the Future, 1985, Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox, a teenager transported back in time to the high school attended by his parents, must struggle to reconstitute the past as it actually happened after his accidental intrusion threatens to alter the initial run of the tape when his mother, in an interesting variation of Oedipus, develops a crush on him. The events that McFly must rectify seem to be tiny occurrences of absolutely no moment, but he knows that nothing could be more important, since failure will result in that ultimate of consequences, his own erasure, because his parents will never meet. The greatest expression of contingency, my nomination, is the holotype of the genre. Comes near the end of Frank Capra's masterpiece, It's a Wonderful Life. I'm going to read an asterisk about that. Holotype is a taxonomic jargon for the specimen designated to bear the name of a species. Holotypes are chosen because concepts of the species may change later, and biologists must have a criterion for assigning the original name. If, for example, later taxonomists decide that 2 species were mistakenly mixed together in the first description, the original name will go to the group, including the holotype specimen. Okay, It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey, Jimmy Stewart, led a life of abnegation, because his basic decency made him defer personal dreams to offer support for family in town. His precarious building and loan association has been driven to bankruptcy and charged with fraud through the scheming of the town's skinflint and robber baron, Mr. Potter, Lionel Barrymore. George, in despair, decides to drown himself, but Clarence Oddbody, his guardian angel, intervenes by throwing himself into the water first, knowing that George's decency will demand another rescue in preference of immediate suicide. Clarence then tries to cheer George up by the direct route. Quote, "You just don't know all that you've done," end quote. But George replies, quote, "If it hadn't been for me, everybody'd be a lot better off. I suppose it would have been better if I'd never been born at all," end quote. Clarence, in a flash of inspiration, grants George his wish and shows him an alternate version of life in his town of Bedford Falls, replayed in his complete absence. This magnificent 10-minute scene is both a highlight of cinematic history and the finest illustration that I have ever encountered for the basic principle of contingency. A replay of the tape yielding an entirely different but equally sensible outcome. Small and apparently insignificant changes, George's absence among others, lead to cascades of accumulating differences. Everything in the replay without George makes perfect sense in terms of personalities and economic forces. But this alternative world is bleak and cynical, even cruel, while George, by his own apparently insignificant life, had imbued his surroundings with kindness and attendant success for his beneficiaries. Bedford Falls, his idyllic piece of small-town America, is now filled with bars, pool halls, and gambling joints. It has been renamed Pottersville because the Bailey Building and Loan failed in George's absence, and his unscrupulous rival took over the property and changed the town's name. A graveyard now occupies the community of small homes that George had financed at low interest with endless forgiveness of debts. George's uncle, in despair at bankruptcy, is in an asylum. His mother, hard and cold, runs a poor boarding house. His wife is an aging spinster working in the town library. 100 men lay dead on a sunken transport because his brother drowned without George to rescue him and never grew up to save the ship and win the Medal of Honor. The wily angel, clinching his case, then pronounces the doctrine of contingency. Quote, "Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives, and when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he? You see, George, you really had a wonderful life." And I think that's where I'll stop for tonight. And I love you, and I hope you sleep tight, and don't let the chappies bite. And I'm blowing you some kisses. Mwah, 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 mwah. Send me some from yourself, okay? I love you. Good night. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.